Are we on the verge of an economic catastrophe? What if the US dollar was no longer the world's reserve currency? Picture a world where the dollar isn't the king it once was, where its power and influence have diminished. What would that mean for global economics, for trade, for you and me? These are the questions that should be asked in today's world of economics. The potential effects are staggering and could fundamentally change our way of life. But before we dive into this historic event, we need to understand how we got here. To understand the gravity of this situation, we need to step back in time. In 1944, the US dollar was pegged to gold, forming the backbone of the global economy. This momentous event took place at a conference in Breton Woods, New Hampshire, where delegates from 44 nations gathered to design a new financial system for the post-war world. This was the birth of the Bretton Woods Agreement, and with it, the birth of the US dollar's reign as the world's premier reserve currency. So, what does it mean for a currency to be pegged to gold? And what is a reserve currency? Simply put, a currency being pegged to gold means a country's currency has a value directly linked to gold. This system was a sort of monetary discipline, a system that provided the dollar with real, tangible value. It said to the world, each dollar in your pocket has value and is as good as gold. The Bretton Woods Agreement also established two key global institutions that would later control our entire economic system: the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Their role was to maintain stability in the international monetary system and to aid economic development. This was a time of optimism and cooperation, a brave new world where the dollar was king and gold was its crown. The gold standard system brought stability and trust to the US dollar. Countries all around the globe began to hoard dollars as a reserve currency, confident in its gold-backed value. This global trust allowed the US to grow and prosper as a nation, its currency a symbol of economic strength and stability. But the Bretton Woods system was not just about economics. It was also a geopolitical strategy, designed to increase American power and influence worldwide. The strength of the dollar was the driving force behind the United States' global influence. The dollar's dominance in global finance allowed the US to exert considerable power on the international stage, allowing them to shape economic policies and influence political decisions. Yet, as we'll see, this golden age of dollar dominance was not destined to last. The gold standard, a seemingly unbreakable pillar of the US economy, would eventually crumble under the weight of its own success. But nothing lasts forever, right? Believe it or not, the concept of fiat money is not a new phenomenon. Now, the first known instance of fiat money dates back to 11th century China, during the Song dynasty. The Chinese government issued paper money known as jiaozi, which had no intrinsic value but was made legal tender by the government. This was a revolutionary concept, an idea that money could be something other than precious metals or commodities. Fast forward to the 18th century, the British pound sterling, once backed by silver, became a fiat currency during the years of the Napoleonic Wars, when the gold standard was temporarily abandoned due to financial exigencies. The pound suffered periods of inflation and deflation, teaching us that a fiat currency's value can be volatile and heavily influenced by the economic policies of the issuing government. It wasn't until the 19th century that Britain returned to the gold standard, restoring stability to the pound. These examples illustrate the common cycle of fiat currencies: a rise during times of economic prosperity, followed by a fall during times of economic hardship. Every other previous fiat currency has, at some point, failed. Not a single one throughout has lasted, and they all meet the same fate: overprinting and hyperinflation. The transition from commodity-backed currencies like gold and silver to fiat currencies marked a crucial turning point in monetary history. It represented a shift in trust, from trust in tangible commodities to trust in the government and its economic policies. However, this trust is a double-edged sword. While it provides flexibility for governments to manage their economies, it also opens the door to potential economic mismanagement, leading to inflation or even hyperinflation. As we move forward, keep in mind that the fate of the dollar is not only influenced by its detachment from gold, but also by the economic decisions of those in power. So what happened to the gold standard? In 1971, President Nixon announced the end of the gold standard. With those words, the relationship between the US dollar and gold was forever altered. In the years leading up to Nixon's decision, the world was struggling with economic instability. The US was deeply involved in the Vietnam War, an expensive endeavor that was draining the country's gold reserves. The Bretton Woods system, which had linked global currencies to the US dollar, was under strain as nations began to question the US's ability to maintain the dollar's gold value. In the middle of this fire, Nixon made a bold move. On August 15, 1971, he announced that the US would no longer convert dollars to gold at a fixed value. This decision effectively eliminated the gold standard. The immediate aftermath was a whirl of economic adjustments. The US dollar was no longer tethered to the tangible value of gold. Instead, it transitioned into a fiat currency, a type of currency whose value is derived from the government that issues it. That meant that your dollar was valued by a person's opinion rather than a physical commodity of real value. This was a massive shift in the world of economics. For the first time, the US dollar's value was based on the trust and confidence in the US government. This shift allowed the US Federal Reserve more flexibility in adjusting monetary policies. They could now control money supply and influence interest rates without the constraints of a physical gold reserve. Yet, this newfound freedom came with uncertainties. Without the gold standard, there was no concrete limit to the amount of money that could be printed. This raised concerns about potential inflation and the devaluation of the dollar. And this is where the fall of the dollar begins. The dollar's ties to tangible gold were severed, but what did this mean for its future? Since Nixon's decision in 1971, the purchasing power of the dollar has been on a steady decline. A striking fact is that what a dollar could get you in the early 70s, today you would require approximately $8. That's an alarming drop in purchasing power of close to 800%. The primary causes behind this downfall are inflation and debt. To explain, inflation is an economic occurrence where the price of goods and services inflate over time, leading to a decrease in the value of money. With the Federal Reserve's inflation rate being targeted at 2% per annum, it may seem negligible. However, when this is compounded over 5 decades, it results in the dollar's purchasing power being cut in half. This is a significant concern associated with the Federal Reserve. The Fed, or the Federal Reserve, is responsible for setting and managing interest rates, controlling the money supply, and overall economic activity. The Fed controls the rates at which you and banks borrow money. They also can print money, with no limitations. You see very quickly how much control the Fed has over the monetary system. The next issue is debt. The public debt in the United States has skyrocketed past $28 trillion. This is more than a whopping 130% of our GDP. When the government takes out loans, it results in more dollars being printed. But as per basic economics, when the supply of an item increases, its value decreases. So the more money we print, the less value the US dollar will have. Additionally, our choice to deviate from the gold standard in 1971 has rendered the dollar without any inherent value. The dollar is now unattached from something physical, like gold. Its value is now based on the faith and trust of people. If the people believe it has value, then they give it value, both domestically and internationally. But when that belief and trust is lost, so is the value of the dollar. It's important to note that the dollar's decline is not solely an American issue. It has effects on a global scale. The dollar is the world's reserve currency. Many nations keep their foreign exchange reserves in dollars. A declining dollar diminishes the value of their reserves. Similarly, commodities like oil, which are priced in dollars, become more expensive for countries that don't use. So, what would actually happen if the US dollar was no longer the reserve currency? What are the lasting effects? Let's dissect the possible outcomes of the dollar being replaced. The US dollar's reserve currency status provides several advantages to the United States. It allows the country to borrow at lower interest rates, facilitates international trade, and grants the US significant influence over the global financial system. However, if the dollar were to lose its reserve currency status, the consequences would be far-reaching. geopolitical dynamics would shift as well. The United States' ability to use economic sanctions as a diplomatic tool would be diminished, as other nations would be less compelled to comply. This could potentially weaken U.S. influence globally and reshape the balance of power between nations. However, it is essential to note that the loss of reserve currency status for the U.S. dollar could also present new opportunities. It would incentivize the United States to address its fiscal imbalances and reduce its reliance on debt, fostering a more sustainable economic model. At global economic summits, discussions would revolve around finding a new reserve currency to replace the dollar. This process would require extensive negotiations and cooperation among nations, potentially leading to increased tensions and rivalries. Financial markets around the world would experience significant volatility. As investors seek alternative safe haven currencies, exchange rates would fluctuate wildly, impacting trade and investment flows. Developing economies, heavily reliant on dollar-denominated debt, would face increased financial instability. The manufacturing sector, particularly in countries that export goods to the United States, would be greatly affected. As the dollar loses its status, demand for U.S. products would decrease, leading to a decline in American manufacturing and job losses. The average citizen would also feel the effects of a change in the reserve currency. Inflation could rise as the cost of imported goods increases due to currency fluctuations. This, coupled with potential economic downturns, could result in higher unemployment rates, reduced purchasing power, and a decline in living standards. The fate of the U.S. dollar is uncertain, but one fact stands out. The decision to abandon the gold standard has had extensive repercussions.